Well, welcome back. We have a little bit more work to do before we actually get into the scriptures of the New Testament, but just wanted to let you know that you can find this information that I've just gone through in the past lecture. You can find it in a good study Bible, usually between the Old Testament and New Testament. There will be a few pages about the times between the Testaments, and that's where you can find much of this history. So just want you to be aware of that. And I don't expect you to get all of the details of the past lecture. What I'm trying to do more so is to get you to have a sense or a feel for just the intensity of being conquered kingdom after kingdom after kingdom, and yet these promises and the hope that somehow God's going to break in and interrupt everything and actually establish God's kingdom. So I'm going to go ahead and erase the board. Then we're going to talk about a few more things before we actually move to the scriptures. So the first thing we're going to talk about is promise and fulfillment. And this is the best way to understand the relationship between the Old Testament and the New Testament. That the Old Testament is full of promise about the promised land, about if you listen to my commandments, obey my voice, you'll be my people, most treasured, priestly kingdom, holy nation. All focused on Torah. Then the promise of the throne, an everlasting dynasty through the line of David, and through David's line, God would establish God's rule. And then the temple, that my name will be there, I'll watch over that place. And so that's kind of the promises, and we're always seeing those worked out, but always in partial fulfillment in the Old Testament. So we're always kind of leaning forward, when's this promise going to really get fulfilled? And ultimately, it's the promise of salvation, the promise of blessing, that God is going to bless, restore, renew, make new through Abraham and his children. And so when is this promise going to be fulfilled? Who's going to fulfill it? How is God going to do it? So that's the promise of the Old Testament, kind of leaning us forward. Don't think of the Old Testament simply as predictions, and so that you're looking for, okay, does this prediction come true? No, think of it in terms of promise. Promise is bigger than prediction. Promise is kind of this whole movement of God working things out to bring about, renewal and salvation through the children of Abraham. New Testament, think fulfillment. Okay, that in the New Testament, we have the fulfillment of the promises. And it's maybe incomplete in one sense, but the promises are definitely fulfilled in a way that they've never been fulfilled before. And so we see Jesus as the fulfillment of the Old Testament. Now, I don't know if this is helping you or not, but I really think we need to try to shift away from a mindset of simply predictions coming true, that Jesus can check the box. He was born in Bethlehem. Micah said the prophet or the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Check that box, prediction come true. Okay, there's some of that, but it's much bigger than that. So that Jesus is fulfilling kind of a role, kind of fulfilling a hope, rather than simply predictions coming true. So let me try to get at it this way. Have you ever watched a movie and you were really engaged in the movie, and then the ending scene took place, and all of a sudden it's like, that just didn't fit? Like, you had this story going on, and then you get the ending, and the ending doesn't really fulfill the story. Okay, so think about the New Testament, Old Testament in that kind of way, where the New Testament, what happens with Jesus, it actually fulfills the Old Testament. Everything that the Old Testament was leaning into, Jesus fulfills it, just like a good ending, if you will, of a movie versus a bad ending. Okay, or maybe you relate more to a sports game that you're watching, and it's this intense battle all through the first half and the second half, and it just intensifies and intensifies, and maybe one team is making a comeback on another team, and then the game's over, and how does it end? It ends on a bad call, that the ref just blew the call, game over, that's it. And it's like, that ending does not fulfill in any way whatsoever the action of the game. Okay, again, promise and fulfillment. It's not about prediction simply coming true. It's about the movement. It's about this drama. It's about what God is doing in and through Israel across the generations of history. And Jesus brings that to a fulfillment like no one ever expected. So when Jesus is there dead on the cross and they bury him, that's the bad ending of the movie. Like that just does not fit. What had Jesus been doing? Jesus had been pronouncing forgiveness of sins upon people, reconciling people to God. Jesus had been transforming people's lives. Jesus had been part of this huge renewal movement where it looked like through him, God was really coming and ushering in this new day, and that God was really beginning to rule like never before through Jesus. And so we have this sense of fulfillment, like, yeah, this is the ending that we've been hoping for. And then he's crucified and he's on the cross, he's dead, he's buried, and everybody is just thinking, wow, this was not the ending we hoped for. And it left just this really empty, sour taste in everybody's mouth, like this can't be. And all of their hopes were dashed. And then you have the resurrection. And the Messiah was never, in the mindset of first century Jews, the Messiah was never supposed to get killed. Even when Jesus tried to teach about his death, the disciples didn't get it. And yet Jesus went through with it. And everybody is lost in confusion and feels like this is the worst ending ever. We thought he was the Messiah, but he's dead, he's buried. That was never supposed to happen to the Messiah. Man, just broken. And then resurrection happens. And it's such good news, they can hardly believe it. But it's such powerful news. And all of a sudden, the story is fulfilled in a way that went beyond anything they could have ever imagined. That Jesus is resurrected from the dead. He's giving of his spirit to the disciples and empowering them to go forth and preach the good news and to baptize people, that the Spirit would continue to work in them and through them and be given to others. And it's just news that's beyond their imagination. And so they thought they saw the ending coming that they were hoping for, and then that got blown up. And then they thought, we must have been wrong about Jesus. He must not be the one that fulfills everything. And then all of a sudden the resurrection takes place and they realize, wow, the fulfillment was way bigger than they ever expected. That through Jesus, God's future is really broken into the present so that Jesus is a firstborn from among the dead and that the Holy Spirit is given. And the Old Testament promises are fulfilled in a way that only God could have imagined. So when you think Old Testament, New Testament, you're thinking promise and fulfillment, and that salvation has come and God's kingdom has come in a way that went beyond what anybody ever really expected. Okay? Promise, fulfillment. Don't think in terms of predictions and predictions coming true and check the box. Think in terms of these larger promises, and in Jesus and through his death and resurrection, those promises are fulfilled in a way that really the disciples didn't even see coming. Okay, promise and fulfillment. Now let's see, do I need to say anything else about that? Well, the next place we're going to go kind of keeps working with this promise and fulfillment theme. The word is eschatology. I've kind of backed up a little bit so you can see the word on the board, eschatology. And let me break the word down. And so eschatos or eschaton would be last or end, ology, kind of the study of the end things. And so sometimes eschatology is thought of as the study of the end times, okay, or study of the ends. Okay, but we're going to use it a little bit broader than that in terms of it's basically your understanding of history. And so what is the perspective of history? Where is history going? What is the end of history? End maybe in terms of an ending, no more history, but maybe end in terms of the goal of history. What is history moving towards? And we're going to talk for a moment about biblical eschatology. Now, there are other kinds of eschatology. Okay, some would say that, you know, the world just goes in and history just goes in cycles, that there's nothing new that really happens. It's just cyclical, it just goes round and round and round. not really going anywhere. No God is over it, moving it towards a destination, that history just happens in cycles. Okay, that's one approach to eschatology. Okay, another approach to eschatology is that there is this sense of maybe destiny or fate, and that humans don't really have much of an interactive part in it, that the gods just kind of have fates for everybody. And you can't really control it. There's no real justice to it. It's just some people's fate to, have a good life, some people's fate to have a very painful life, some people's fate to die young, some to die old. And so some approach eschatology as there's just kind of fate. It's not really going anywhere. It just kind of happens. It's kind of random in one sense. In another sense, fate happens to people. Okay, but that's not a biblical approach either, in terms of it going nowhere, or in terms of it being fated, or in terms of just a cycle. Biblical eschatology is somewhat linear in terms of God is over history and God is moving history towards a particular goal, a particular destination. So in the Old Testament, we have promises about what God is moving history towards, and we have these anticipations of what it's going to be like when God fulfills those promises and kind of brings history towards its goal. Okay, and then in the New Testament, that gets blown up even more beyond what they could expect in the Old Testament. So let me draw a couple of charts up here that help us, at least I think, better understand eschatology, kind of what God is up to across history from a biblical perspective. So let's get this erased. And we'll start out with our Old Testament eschatology. So OT, Old Testament eschatology. And so here's our timeline, here's our history line, and here we have kind of this division. Okay, and so here we have the old age, and then we have this age to come. The old age is marked by sin, sickness, death, curse, oppression, violence, darkness. Okay, you get the picture. Okay, that in this old age, we need salvation. We need salvation from sin, from sickness, from death, from being under God's curse. Salvation from the violence that is rampant among humanity and upon all flesh and among all flesh. Very dark time in terms of refusing to walk in the ways of God. Time of oppression in which people use their power and kingdoms use their power to oppress and exploit. So a very, very dark age. Okay, and in the midst of this, you have the people of Israel, and God has made these promises, but we see that the people of Israel really aren't much better off, or aren't really living in, what should I say, more righteous lives than the rest of the world, because they're still infected by the same sin that infects the whole human race. But they have these promises over here. And so how are those promises going to get fulfilled so that the new age is actually brought into reality, and that we are rid of sin and rid of sickness and death and curse, and that the land is once again made new and made fruitful and bountiful? So the anticipation is in the age to come that it's going to be marked by righteousness, by life, by resurrection, by God outpouring his Spirit upon all people. So you can see this radical transformation. In the new age, there's going to be this righteousness instead of sin, that there's going to be resurrection instead of death, that there's going to be this life that is just abundant and joyful, and that God is going to pour out his Spirit upon peoples of this new age. And there'll be vindication against oppression and against enemies, so that there'll be a time of justice as well. And maybe one word to kind of capture it all is there'll be this peace, this shalom, in which everything is made right. And so the Old Testament hope is, belief is, conviction is that God is moving things towards this day. Okay, and how is this day actually going to happen? Well, right here, the Messiah. God is going to send the Messiah to usher in this new age, this anointed son of David. God is going to raise up, and through this anointed son of David, anointed, endowed with God's Spirit, there's going to be this regathering and this renewal take place so that it truly is a new day. And that there will be resurrection of the people of Israel and even anticipation of resurrection from the dead, that death will no longer be victorious. Okay, and so there's kind of this grand hope, if you will, that God is going to make this incredible renewal movement. And again, it's going to happen through the coming of the Messiah. And the temple will be made new, God's Spirit will be poured out upon the people, and there'll be this time of peace and blessing. Now, I had various interpretations of this, but they all believed that this new day was going to come about through the Messiah. And the Messiah would restore the temple, the Spirit would be poured out, and there'd be this time of blessing under God's presence. Okay, Old Testament eschatology, regathering of Israel with that as well. Okay, New Testament eschatology, there's a pretty significant shift that takes place. So let me quickly erase this part of it. Okay, so we still have this age, and then we get the age to come further out here. So now we get the age to come. And again, it's marked by resurrection, the giving of God's Spirit, so that Torah can be kept, so that we can live rightly and live in the blessing of God and peace with each other. So this peace, this shalom, is out there. Righteousness, all things made right. Life. Okay, so you get the picture. That's out there, okay? What happens is, from a New Testament perspective, is here we have Jesus breaking into history. Birth of Jesus, the Messiah has come. Jesus is the anointed one. The Spirit is upon Jesus. Okay, and so we have this future breaking into the present in and through Jesus. And then Jesus gets crucified. And so everybody's thinking that we're wrong about Jesus, that Jesus must not be the one to usher this future in, or usher them into this future, because Jesus is crucified. He's dead. He must have been an imposter. We got fooled. And then resurrection happens. And Jesus is resurrected from the dead. And so now the future is breaking into the present through Jesus, and his resurrection is the proof of it. That in his life, he did miracles, and all those miracles, the healings that he did, the feedings that he did, all those miracles are just evidence that the future, God's kingdom, really is being brought into the present in and through Jesus. Okay, you with me so far? But then Jesus dies, he's crucified, resurrected, and now they're certain that in Jesus, even though it wasn't what they were expecting in terms of the Messiah, Jesus didn't do everything that they thought he would, that the Messiah was quote unquote supposed to do, yet his resurrection is the proof that, wow, he really is the Messiah. And they begin to reread the New Testament through the lens that Jesus is the one, who fulfills the story. Okay, so the problem is, well, quote unquote problem, is that this age doesn't come in fullness. Because what we discover is that there is still death, that there's still sin, there's still sickness, there's still violence. So this age has continued. Jesus breaks in so that the future is becoming present, but this age continues. And the Spirit is given. And so disciples of Jesus have the Holy Spirit within them, who empowers them to live rightly. They have peace with God, peace with one another. Okay, there's been reconciliation. The Spirit empowers them to live rightly, and yet there's still death, and there's still sickness, and there's still this struggle against sin. And so where we find ourselves is in this overlap of the ages, where Jesus has brought God's future into the present, and yet the old age continues. And we're kind of trapped, if you will, or stuck in this overlap of the ages, to where we have the Spirit, yes, but we're still living under a death sentence. That we have the Spirit, yes, it empowers us to live rightly and to have peace with God, and yet we find ourselves still facing major temptation and find ourselves sometimes succumbing to sin, and find that we live in a world where there's violence and oppression and exploitation. And so there's this overlap of the ages. And so this is often referred to as the already not yet. The already not yet, to where God's kingdom has already come in Jesus, but is not yet here in its fullness. And so this line over here is the return. The return of Jesus. I probably should have used a different color to try to emphasize that more. So we got Jesus first coming as the Messiah King who suffered, the servant king who suffers and dies and is resurrected, and his Spirit is given, and the promise of his return, of his second coming. And when he comes again, he will come in all power and strength. He will come and fully establish his rule over the face of the earth, so much so that the heavens and the earth are made completely new. And there will be resurrection, not just of Jesus, but resurrection of all believers in Jesus. Resurrection of all, the believers unto life and the dead unto, and those who didn't believe unto judgment. And so there's this anticipation of Jesus' return. This is what Advent season looks forward to. Okay, I know that a lot of times when we celebrate Advent, we simply think of Advent as before Christmas, and so we're thinking of the advent of Jesus as a babe in a manger. But if you pay close attention to the Advent season and the purpose of the Advent season, it's not simply to help us remember that Jesus came as a babe in a manger, it's to remind us that Jesus is coming again to usher in the fullness of God's kingdom, to establish it so that there's no more death, no more sin, no more sickness, no more oppression and violence, that peace is brought. And so we live in this overlap of the ages, that this is kind of the age of the church. Sometimes it's thought of as the age of the Spirit. The Spirit is given, and believers live by the power of the Spirit, but we anticipate resurrection. So that instead of simply being under a death sentence, believers are also under a resurrection sentence that totally transforms death. Okay, so eschatology, where is history going? What's the end? What's the goal of it? From a biblical perspective, and in particular, New Testament perspective, we're in this overlap of the ages, where God's future age is breaking into the present through Jesus. It's already here, but is not yet here in fullness. And so we experience forgiveness, we experience the gift of his Spirit, we have peace with God, peace with each other, and yet we're still under a death sentence. Even though we're under a resurrection sentence, we still experience sickness, we still struggle with sin. There's still a lot of violence, a lot of oppression that takes place in the world. We're still crying for everything to be made right. But the Spirit is kind of a down payment that this day is coming. Jesus' resurrection, a first fruit that this day is coming. That we can anticipate Jesus' return, and when he returns, this new age, this new day, fully established history will arrive at its goal that God is moving it towards. Okay, so promise and fulfillment, already not yet, biblical eschatology. Now this is behind every document in the New Testament. Whether you're reading the Gospels, whether you're reading Acts, whether you're reading one of Paul's letters, whether you're reading one of the other letters, whether you're reading Revelation, this framework, this eschatology, it informs every single writer. That they're all working from this perspective that in Jesus, God's kingdom has come. but it hasn't come yet in its fullness, and it will come in its fullness when Jesus returns. So make sure that you are aware of that you have this sense of overlap of the ages, already not yet, and you will see this across every page of the New Testament, that the writers are working from this perspective of what God is up to in history. Promise and fulfillment, partially fulfilled, guaranteed full fulfillment is coming. How do we know that? The resurrection of Jesus, first fruits that day is coming. The gift of the Spirit to believers, down payment that this day is coming. All right, so that is some of our background stuff that we need to make sure that we have in place, that Jesus fulfills the promises. And while they're not yet fulfilled completely, we have this hope, this assurance that when Jesus returns through Jesus, God's future kingdom will be fully established and the fullness of salvation will be present. Okay, where are we going next? Gonna go ahead and shut this one off. Then we're going to begin to talk a little bit about the relationship of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And we will also talk about the titles of Jesus. So thanks for watching this, and we're going to shift gears here.